Good evening, everyone. It's time to begin our study in the life of Christ. If you've got your lesson books, we're in lesson 13 in our study of the fourfold gospel, and we'll be in John chapter 7. If you don't have the questions book, John chapter 7 and 8 are our primary texts tonight. Our goal is to accelerate a bit after this, catch up a little bit. We're going to try to cover lesson 13 tonight. Whatever we don't get to, we just don't get to. Next week, instead of just lesson 14, I'd like to combine lessons 14 and 15. It looked like a good opportunity to do so because they only had like 18 to 20 questions each instead of the normal 28 that we've been seeing. So that's ambitious, but we'll see what the high points are through those two lessons. And then lessons 16 and 17 would be the week following, which will get us up to the raising of Lazarus and that section that's in lesson 17. So just be aware of that. It's a little more reading. Focus on the text. If you can't get to all the commentary reading, that's completely understood. We want to glorify God and understand His Word. Let's go to God in prayer, and then we'll dive into our study this evening in lesson 13. All right, John chapter 7. As we've been noticing this period in a pivot of sorts from the work of Jesus in Galilee to now coming to Jerusalem. We noticed in our study last week there was a brief text in lesson 13 over in Luke 9:51 through 62 that talked about Jesus turning his face toward Jerusalem. And so he is now just about 6 months out from his death on the cross, because that Feast of Booths, that Feast of Tabernacles, was in the September-October time frame, the seventh month of their year, so the midpoint between Passovers. If you would turn over to Malachi chapter 3 before we get into the John 7 text. Malachi chapter 3. We know he's on his way to Jerusalem and he's going into the temple. And this is an interesting text that is noted that is fulfilled here in John chapter 7. Read with me Malachi chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. Behold, I am going to send my messenger, and he will clear the way before me. And the Lord, who you seek, will suddenly come to his temple. And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a smelter and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, so that they may present to the Lord offerings in righteousness. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to the Lord, as in the days of old and as in former years. A lot of times we come to a text like this to talk about the prophecy for whom? John the Baptist. Because he's mentioned in those first few words, behold, I'm going to send my messenger. He will clear the way before me. But then it goes on to talk about whom? The one he's preparing the way for. It says, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. You know, we've been studying a similar event on Sunday mornings. How was that seen in our study of Solomon?
Bringing the ark in.
What was that, Norm?
Bringing the ark in.
They brought the ark in, and what happened?
God
Build the temple.
The Lord suddenly came into his temple, right? And it was in that thick cloud, the cloud of his presence. And so here it's being prophesied again that the Lord is going to suddenly come to his temple. And what's he going to do when he's there? Mentions him sitting. What's he doing? No?
God's going to purify the sons of Levi, which are
Yeah.
the priests, which are the ones that are doing the work in the temple.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's these sons of Levi. And are there any priests involved in Jesus' discussions? A lot of times it's those chief priests, many of whom are Pharisees and Sadducees. And so how is it that he's like a smelter who's refining silver and gold?
Make it pure. Make it pure. Get rid of the impurity.
Yeah, you think of, how much time you might spend holding that precious metal over the fire to let the dross, be removed so that it becomes more and more pure. And that's what we see Jesus doing as he's teaching, and he's teaching those who are, of course, self-righteous, but he's teaching them about true righteousness. And so this is so that they may present to the Lord offerings in righteousness. Verse 3. So that he's returning them so that they may do these things that are pleasing to the Lord as in the days of old. So I see some connections there. If you flip back to John chapter 7, who is it that's seeking Jesus? Because it said in the prophecy, the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. Who was it that was seeking Jesus? I heard Jews. Yep, so if you're in John 7, look at verse 11. So we've already talked last week about how he was not going to go to the feast. His brothers were kind of chiding him for not being open with his message. But then he decides to go. He goes secretly, and he shows up kind of in the middle of the week of their feast. But the Jews were seeking him at the feast, verse 11. And were saying, where is he? So here's the Lord whom you seek. And then he suddenly comes to his temple, verse 14. But when it was now the midst of the feast, Jesus went up into the temple and began to teach. And so then we have 2 chapters here, and really, much more that are, Jesus is now in Jerusalem as he had formerly been in Capernaum, right? Capernaum had been his home, headquarters, while he's all over Galilee. Now Jerusalem is essentially his home base from here on out. He's going to be retiring to places outside the city. We see him go to the Mount of Olives when everyone else is going to their homes. And so he's either living outside or perhaps at the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. So he comes to his temple. And so we have an opportunity now to study some of the things that he teaches as he sits and smelts the gold. So as we were looking at the questions last week, we touched on the first question. So I wanted to pick up on 4, 5, and 6. As he's going down to Jerusalem, and this is actually over in Luke 9, 51 through 62, if you want to look at that text. As he's on his way down, he goes through Samaria, and as he's going through Samaria, they reject him because he's on his way to Jerusalem. They don't like people traveling through their land who are on their way to Jerusalem. But he encounters these 3 who say that they are interested in following him, right? That first one, question 4, what was the response of Jesus to the one who said he would follow him wherever he went?
Now follows the birds of the air and up the nest, but the Son of God has nowhere to lay his head.
Right. Which makes sense as Jesus is now, if he had a home base in Capernaum, he's now away from that. He's going to be in Jerusalem without any home to speak of. And he's challenging a person to consider, am I willing to suffer that kind of loss in order to follow Jesus? So the desire to follow, and these are anecdotes that I'm sure happened frequently, but the desire to follow was not always met just with a simple, all right, let's go. It was, what kind of a response? Why does Jesus respond that way, Norm?
It's not a knee-jerk reaction to say, have you considered what you were asking?
Mm-hmm.
And what I expect is the one you're following. There's a commitment that's involved. It's beyond the, oh, hey, I'm a follower, label achieved. Ding.
Right. It's not just a simple thing. He wants you to consider, to count the cost of discipleship. What about the second one? How did he respond when someone says, I need to go bury my dead father? Pretty famous response, right? Let the dead bury their own dead. And what does he mean?
Go and preach word.
He's got work for you to do, right? He wants you to preach. This is a mission of preaching and spreading the word. It's not just following Jesus, but everybody's going to be put to work. And so burying a dead father seems like an important responsibility for a son, but in comparison to the work that you're signing up for, it's not important. Penny?
And I've heard it say that to bury his dead father, maybe his father wasn't dead yet, and it was down the line. So, yeah, I want to follow you, but not right now.
Right. Yeah, it very much could be a person who's nearing death, and who knows how long this is going to take. How long of a delay might this be? Norm?
I don't know how.
I thought I saw a hand.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, the one you just asked.
Oh, no. That was rhetorical.
Okay. It came across to me also the idea of the dead burying the dead, those that are spiritually dead.
Yeah.
In the world and tied up in worldly things. You can't get any more worldly than the idea of the living, dying process going on. And the worthlessness of once the person is gone and the spirit is in heaven, that is worthless. It's useless. It's just going back to the dust of the earth, and to put a priority on that over the service of serving Christ is a much higher priority in the work.
Yeah, and this is one of those hard sayings that probably plays off of the response, right? Showing a more general principle that anything that you would say, but first, is not putting the Lord first. He wants us to put him and his work ahead of anything. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with taking the time to care for a parent, as so many of us do and will have to do. And the third one, the one who puts his hand to the plow. Why are they not fit for the kingdom if they look back?
Because of what the field looks like after somebody does that.
Yeah, Andy had a good talk on that. Looking back while you're trying to mow.
Yep.
Yeah, you're not going to go very straight. Jesse?
Remember Lot's wife.
Lot's wife, she looks back. She's, told not to. And that shows a certain longing, maybe where her treasure is. Has anybody noticed the similarity between this and the stories of Elijah and Elisha? I had missed it for years, but he talks about one who's putting his hand to the plow, and the one who's asking if they can go back and say goodbye to those at home. It's almost a retelling of the story. It's over in 1 Kings 19 and verse 20. So we're coming up on it soon in our Sunday mornings. But as Elijah is calling Elisha, he finds him plowing. He's got a yoke of oxen, maybe more than one, and they're plowing, and he's called now to follow Elisha to take on Elijah's mantle. And he asks, can I go say goodbye to those at home first? Does anybody remember if he's allowed to or not? He is. He's allowed to go.
Well, he also kills his oxen, right, and sacrifices.
He does.
them.
Yeah.
It always, I always think about this time that all the food preparation takes in the Old Testament, when Abraham saw the strangers and he killed the lamb, prepared the lamb, and fed. So it wasn't just 5 minutes. It's not like
TV dinner you
get
put in the
some
microwave.
sandwich, yes.
Yeah.
And the same as with Elisha. He didn't just, okay, bye. He did the big sacrifice. He killed the oxen with which he plowed.
Yes.
So it took a while.
It's just an interesting thing to note. What Elijah allows, Jesus does not. Elijah was great. Jesus is greater. The work that a person is called to serve the Master, Christ, is in contrast to what was being done in the days of Elijah so much greater. This is for the kingdom of heaven. So interesting connection there. It's right there in my chain references. Never noticed it. All right, so what's the general lesson here about all three of these? He teaches these three anecdotes all together to emphasize what point? Sam?
You've got to, assess what the cost is going to be to follow him, establish that it's worth it, and then once you're with him, there's no turning back. You're committed to him.
That's right. There's a commitment needed, and each of us should consider that. As our children consider becoming Christians, we want to help them consider the commitment that they're making. Anyone who would come to Christ, are you ready to commit your life to serving him? All right, so as he then, back in John chapter 7, goes up into the temple and begins to teach. Notice question 7. Why did the people had been speaking about him before he even gets there? Why were they not speaking openly about Jesus? They're afraid of the Jews. So there's all, not only do we see that the Jews are certainly seeking to kill Jesus. When they say, "Where is he?" I put that tone on it because that's how I read it. They're looking for him. They know that these feasts are opportunities to find him. Now, McGarvey's chronology has this 18 months since he was last in Jerusalem, which is remarkable to me. We'll notice some connections back to John chapter 5, but that healing in John chapter 5 at the pool of Bethesda is going to be spoken of specifically here in John chapter 7. And according to McGarvey's work, he's saying he's skipped one Passover, and so this has been 18 months. It's at least 6, right, since the prior Passover, and that healing at the pool of Bethesda was at a Passover, and he heals on the Sabbath day. So what were the different views that they had of Jesus? The people were afraid to speak about him openly, but there was some grumbling in the crowds going on. Shirley?
Well, some said he was good, and some said, no, he deceived the people.
Yeah, he deceives the people. He's a good man. Or no, he leads them astray, my translation says. Interesting views. It reminds me of, as we're talking about evidences for who Christ is, I've heard it described as there's 3 options. Jesus is either a liar, a lunatic, or the Lord. Those are the only 3 options. Some would like to say, well, he was a good man, a good prophet, he was a social reformer, yeah. They're willing to give him all these good titles short of Christ, Son of God. But that's not really an option, right? Because what does he claim? This whole book of John is emphasizing what? He's claiming to be the Son of God. You can't miss that. He was doing it back in John chapter 5 with various arguments. Chapter 7 and 8 are just full of arguments for being the Messiah, right? Before Abraham was, I am. That's kind of the pinnacle of his arguments in these 2 chapters. And so he's either lying about that. Are liars good men? No. That's leading them astray, right? A lunatic, well, I guess maybe he's claiming that and just doesn't know. Maybe he's crazy. Or he really is who he claims to be. Those are, it's hard to find a 4th option there. And so as we seek evidence for who Jesus was, you can kind of rule out the first 2 and you're left with the conclusion that he is who he claimed to be. Jumping down to question 9. Knowing that their leaders wanted to kill him, what question did some of the Jews ask among themselves? Anyone? Question 9. And this, I recognize, it gets a little confusing going through here because of the back and forth. Like, which question are we looking for here? I'm looking down in verse 25 or so. And just before that, just to connect what we're talking about, he he makes this argument beginning in verse 19. Did not Moses give you the law, and yet none of you carries out the law? Why do you seek to kill me? The crowd answers, you have a demon. Who seeks to kill you? He knows, of course, the hearts and minds of everyone, and perhaps the crowd, who's still trying to determine if he's a good man or if he's leading them astray, isn't seeking to kill him. But they have been seeking to kill him. If you flip back to John chapter 5, after he heals that man on the Sabbath day, the paralytic who's told to pick up his pallet and walk, John 5, in verse 17, he says, his argument for healing on the Sabbath is, my Father is working until now, and I myself am working. Meaning, I am God. If God can work on the Sabbath day, so can I, because he's my Father. And so, verse 18, for this reason, therefore, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he not only was breaking the Sabbath, but also was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So they had been seeking to kill him. So back in John 7, the crowd wonders, well, why are you accusing us of trying to kill you? Well, their leaders were. But then notice the connection back to John 5. In John 7:21, Jesus answered them, I did one deed, and you all marvel. He's referring to that healing at the pool. Verse 22, for this reason Moses has given you circumcision, not because it is from Moses, but from the fathers. And on the Sabbath, you circumcise a man. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses will not be broken, are you angry with me because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. You see that connection back to John 5? Interesting that he's picking up on a train of thought that may be as much as 18 months old, but it's still very much on the minds of the people, because that was the last healing he had done in Jerusalem, and what he had been accused of for healing on the Sabbath. And this argument about circumcision, what does that show us about the law?
Circumcision is not required.
It's not required today, but when it was, could you do it on a Sabbath day?
Yes.
Having on 8th day.
Yeah, depending on where the 8th day fell.
Yeah, if the Sabbath was an 8th day, you did. They did. And he wasn't arguing that that was wrong. He was arguing that that's right. You're obeying this law of circumcision, and that it therefore must not be the work that is forbidden to do on the Sabbath day. So when those laws conflict, there is a superior law, and it should be easy to understand. Just like he teaches multiple times, what does he desire? I desire mercy more than sacrifice, right? So the love, compassion, the healing that Jesus was doing was certainly permitted on the Sabbath day. And so then they ask this question starting in verse 25. So some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, is this not the man whom they are seeking to kill? Look, he is speaking publicly, and they are saying nothing to him. The rulers do not really know that this is the Christ, do they? So they're starting to wonder, why is he not being arrested? They know their leaders want Jesus to be captured and put to death, and yet they're not doing it. Okay. Question 10. After telling the people that they did not know the God who had sent him, what did Jesus say about his own knowledge of God? This kind of continues the conversation that he's having with this group of people.
Verse
29, Gil? What's that say?
29. But I know him, for I am from him, and he sent me. Is that what you're talking about?
That's exactly right. Because they had said, verse 27, we know where this man is from, but whenever the Christ may come, no one knows where he's from. But then Jesus makes the argument that you know me, and you know where I am from, verse 28. What does he mean by that? Is he talking about Galilee there?
I think he's talking about where he was born, where he's from.
Yeah, and there's some discussion about where he's born. This division, kind of skipping down to verses 40 through 44, they're concluding this is certainly the prophet, or this is the Christ. But then they have this discussion about, but I thought the Christ was supposed to come from Bethlehem, and this man's come from Galilee. So they're fixated on these requirements to be the Messiah, unaware that he checks every single box that they're disputing. Yes, from Galilee. He's the light from Isaiah chapter 9. Yes, from Bethlehem, Micah 5. Yes, he does all those things. But when he says, verse 28, he cries out in the temple, teaching and saying, "You both know me and know where I am from. And I have not come of myself, but he who sent me is true, whom you do not know." When he stands up and says, "You know me and you know where I am from." Is he preaching about Galilee there, Norman?
He's bringing out the hypocrisy of those that know the scriptures, the very Pharisees who could quote, reams and reams of scriptures back to them, and yet they're not. They're hypocrites.
Okay. Perhaps. I think he's talking about heaven. I'll just tell you where I'm leading. I don't know if anybody senses that from what Jesus is teaching here. You think back to he's already fed the 5,000. He's walked on the water, and his message there is, "I am the bread that came down out of heaven." Right? He said, I'm not just the bread. I'm the bread which came down out of heaven. And he's been teaching that, and every miracle that he works, that they've seen, leads to the conclusion that he is the Son of God, that he is from God, from heaven. And so when they're saying, well, we're not going to know where the Christ is from. Well, no, when you see the Christ and see what the Christ can do, because he works the miracles that were prophesied that the Christ would do, you will know that he is sent from God. No?
It kind of reminds me of what the thing with John the Baptist, when he's talking about this familiarity with where he asked John, just what have you seen? John's people.
That's another one.
What have you seen? Go tell them. These people should have known all of the things that make up the requirements for the Christ, but they don't want him to be.
What did Nicodemus say?
Yeah.
First thing that Nicodemus says when he comes to him by night, back in John 3, "Rabbi, we know that you have come from God as a teacher, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him." That's the Gospel of John is laying out those types of stories to show they should have clearly known. Now deep into the second and third year of Jesus' ministry, he's ready to lay it down. You know where I'm from. Now, what's the conclusion you should draw from that fact? No?
And in this way, he's addressing more the people than the people that Nicodemus came from, because Nicodemus kind of told him they deliberately were choosing not to.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was a deliberate choice, which led them to their obvious conclusion. We would rather kill him and kill people he's raised from the dead than listen to him. But the people who are having this discussion, they've been listening for a year and a half, what the temple's been saying about him. Then there's people that's been coming in saying, hey, this is what I saw out in the countryside and when he was here. And that's why there's this division there at the temple. And now he's there with himself. And he's laying the case before them also. Which is why you get this discourse between, they kept saying the Jews, but it's really the Pharisees and the leading council, the priests, and the people of the lay who were just there in the city, laying around. And that's where this dichotomy is coming. And some of the people are like, well, if we say anything, they're going to throw us out of the synagogue.
Right.
Common people didn't have that authority. That was literally the people in authority that could do that. But they're the ones having the discussion. Is this the guy? Well, I heard he was this, or I heard he was that.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Jesse?
I'm just confused by what seems to be their contradiction, because what they say in verse 27 is, well, no one knows where he comes from, but we know where this guy comes from. And then you get down later, and they're like, "Are you from Galilee too? Search and see that no prophet arises from Galilee." So on one hand, you're saying you don't know where he comes from, and the other hand, you're excluding that area because he can't be from that area, even though you don't know where he's coming from.
Yeah.
It's just falling apart.
Yeah, and it could be, McGarvey noted that he's speaking with the multitudes or crowds in John 7:12. And so there could be kind of different factions. Obviously, some were saying he's a good man, some were saying that he leads the people astray. And so they've got these different schools of thought about the Messiah. We know there's lots of debate. They even come to the conclusion that this certainly is the prophet, and others were saying this is the Christ, when in fact those two things are the same, and some might see the prophet as the Christ, others might see those two as separate fulfillments. So different viewpoints there. Norm?
This is why their plan later on that they finally develop is got to be, we got to do this in secret. Because these same people would have, all of these groups of people with these varying opinions would have showed up at Pilate's place, and they would have had the discussion right there that they're having here. And that wouldn't have worked out well, so they had to do, the plan had to be, we got to do this in secret. Because this is not going to work in front of the Romans.
Yeah.
But remember what happened with Paul in the book of Acts, and as they're in the city, and the Sosthenes gets booted out by the Romans, because again,
Causing a riot.
Causing a riot.
Yeah. They certainly didn't want to have a riot and lose their nation as a result. Yeah. Okay. Let's pick up with the next section, looking down to question 15. So Nicodemus is in this crowd. Who is Nicodemus again? Well, we just mentioned him. He's the one who came to Jesus by night. Interesting that without the Gospel of John, we wouldn't know Nicodemus at all. He's not in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, but he's in John 3 times. Very well known in chapter 3, but we don't see if he's converted or not. Here we find out what about him.
He's the one that came by night.
Okay, he's the one who came by night, but in this next episode, what do we find him doing?
Like secret disciple or something.
Yeah, he's still among the chief priests and rulers, but what kind of an argument does he present?
Does our law judge a person without hearing him first and knowing what he's doing?
Yeah, why might he suggest that? It's a just approach. He said he's calling for justice. The leaders are uninterested in justice. They want to seize him. They've already sent officers to seize him. And what do the officers come back saying? Never has a man spoken like this man, verse 46. So even officers, they're not the learned type, right? They're just the muscle. But they're able to recognize this is someone special. And so they don't arrest him. They were unable to for various reasons, because as it's mentioned multiple times in here, his time had not yet come. And so even if they may have tried, he was not seized by them. So Nicodemus calls for justice. So his approach to being a secret disciple is what? No?
Follow the law.
Okay.
He's learned in the law, so it's like, well, let's follow the law. Because first off, you guys who are the priests and the rulers should be bound by it. And secondly, I know for a fact, having been his follower, he's not violated it.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to bring this is where we should be able to get these two to meet and mediate.
Right. Yeah, perhaps, he's a logical man. He was able to see that Jesus had to have been from God. He hears this message from Jesus in John chapter 3. And so it seems like he's trying to walk the fence a little bit here. I'm gonna stay with the chief priests. I'm not going to reveal that I'm actually a disciple. And maybe I can do some good. Keep this angry mob from going too far. Right? Let's do things by the book. And perhaps if you hear him, right, you'd have the same reaction that these officers had. Wow, what a remarkable man. We should do him honor, right? Rather than put him to death. And so we're going to find out, as we know how the story ends, there's certain characters that you're not going to persuade. How do they even react here to Nicodemus?
Are you also from Galilee?
Right. Yeah, they cast him aside pretty quick with a rebuke. Search and see that no prophet arises out of Galilee. If they were searching, they might find a statement about Galilee, right? Isaiah 9 says that the land of the Gentiles, Galilee, you would see a great light. Was there a hand? No?
It reminds me a little bit of Gamaliel's Acts chapter 5 approach.
It does.
If this is from God,
You can't fight against it.
you might as well listen to him, because if it's from God,
Right.
you're not going to shut him down.
Yeah. So he says, our law does not judge a man unless it first hears from him and knows what he is doing, does it? So he's encouraging a fair trial for Jesus, and he doesn't get it. As we move into chapter 8, you have this account of the adulteress who's brought before Jesus. Perhaps your Bibles put brackets. Mine does, between 7:53 and 8 verse 11. Or maybe you have a marginal note about the manuscripts. That's because our earliest manuscripts don't contain this account. I found it interesting, and I've always wondered about that. I found it interesting what McGarvey noted on this one. He said, according to Jerome was a believer in the time frame of 346 to 420. So 1,700 years ago. And so he said that this section of John 8, the first part, it was contained in many Greek and Latin manuscripts at that time. Now, we've found manuscripts that are older since then and don't find it there. But he probably had a lot more manuscripts back then than we do today. Why? Because he's closer to the source, right? As the scriptures are being copied and those paper fragments eventually disintegrate and you get just the copies of the copies of the copies. Well, we've found a few very amazing and astounding old manuscripts, but it's harder to find when you're 2,000 years from the autograph, the original document. But Jerome's going to have had a lot, and it was in a lot of them, according to Jerome. So that's interesting to study. We won't get too off topic onto textual criticism, but that's why all of our Bibles are still putting it in there with a marginal note, right? And do we see any contradiction here between other things that Jesus has taught? No, not at all. And we're very familiar with the story. I'm sure we've heard lessons on it. The woman caught in adultery, the injustice of the fact that it takes two to tango, and the man was not also brought. And so they're clearly just trying to devise a trap for Jesus to see if he'll go against the law, if he'll even act as a judge when he doesn't have the authority to do so, if he'll say that she should be stoned when the Jews don't have that authority and Rome is the only one who has the authority to put a person to death. And so this question, why did Jesus not condemn her? Was he condoning what she had done?
Told her not to sin anymore when they all left, so it's not that she obviously wasn't doing something that was sinful and wrong.
Correct. It's a very important thing to maybe underline in your Bible. If you get, judge not lest you be judged is frequently misquoted by the world who take that out of context. Maybe this is number 2 of the world's favorite scriptures. Let him who's without sin cast the first stone, right? Basically, you can't judge me. And then what did Jesus say about what she had done? He called it sin and told her to stop, essentially. Go and sin no more. And how many in the crowd had committed sin?
Apparently everybody.
Everyone. Was there something, Norm? Oh, sorry, go.
I was going to say, it'd be interesting to see what he wrote on the ground. some people surmise that he wrote down sins of people that were around there, but that's
an interesting one. Yeah, I've heard.
Well, I mean,
he may have
he wrote
written
down something and then they pretty much left.
Sure, and it's all supposition. Perhaps he was writing the commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery is the 7th, right? But also thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit false witness. Sam?
He says, I guess he says to the woman, I guess he says condemn, but not judge, but then he later says, at least in John's account, in verse 15, like, I judge no one, but if I were to judge, it would be a right judgment. It's like, we know that there will be a point where he does judge, it's just that now is not the time for him to do that.
That's right.
So like he says, like, neither do I condemn you. It's almost like he's saying, I don't do it now, straight up before the time comes.
Right. There's a time. Just like he's saying, it's not time for him to die yet. My time has not yet come. Well, the time for him to judge has not yet come. Right? When he hands the kingdom over to the Father, then he's going to be appointed as judge. Just like he says over in John 12, 47 and 48. If you want to flip forward, in John 12, if anyone, verse 47, hears my sayings and does not keep them, I do not judge him. Oh, well, that's a nice place to stop. Let's stop right there, right? No. For I did not come to judge the world, but to save the world. He who rejects me and does not receive my sayings has one who judges him. The word I spoke is what will judge him at the last day. It's important to point that out to those who say, Jesus didn't come to judge, he came to save. Yes, but he saves with the gospel, and the one who won't obey the gospel will have that as his judge in the last day. Chapter 8 is a wonderful text where he continues to go on from this event of the adulteress and essentially continue this debate with the crowds and teaching the crowds about who he is. And so he makes a number of messianic claims. Question 20, when did Jesus say that the Jews would know who he was?
After his death.
After his death, specifically when?
Son of Man.
When you lift up, right? When you lift up the Son of Man. That's a description of his crucifixion. Again, flipping forward to John 12, he mentions there's a similar text in John 12:32. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself. But he was saying this to indicate the kind of death by which he was to die. So when he says lifted up, that's a reference to the act of crucifixion. Okay, and the question 21, who at first did the Jews claim as their father? Abraham. We have Abraham as our father. There's a bit of an underhanded insult when they say we're not children of fornication. That may suggest that accusation followed Jesus, a child of fornication. Trying to remember the verse. It's in here, and I was looking at my other Bible. But why might that accusation have, what's that? 41, thank you. You were doing the deeds of your father, and they said to him, we're not born of fornication. Why might they have accused Jesus of being born of fornication? The story of the virgin birth, right? That he wasn't perhaps people may have known that he was not the blood son of Joseph. And so the accusation may have been, well, you were born out of wedlock, essentially. But they claim Abraham as their father. He makes the argument back to them that if Abraham's your father, then do the deeds of Abraham, deeds of faith. Then they claim God as their father, and he says, if God were your father, you would love me. Eventually getting down to the argument that Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. They say, you're crazy that Abraham would know you. And he says, before Abraham was born, I am. Using that same word that God describes himself as the great I am, back in Exodus chapter 3. Our time is up. Remember, next week, let's tackle 2 lessons.